Palestinian detainees released from Israeli prisons say abuse and torture are widespread and systematic. Thousands, including children, have been held since the war on Gaza began in October. So, how does Israel treat Palestinians in detention? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Palestinians who've been detained in Israeli prisons say they often face abuse, torture, and mistreatment. Israel has stepped up its arrests since launching its devastating war on Gaza, detaining thousands of Palestinians, among them children. Many detainees say they face beatings, sexual violence, denial of medical assistance, along with other abuses. Some have died in Israeli custody. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has called for an urgent investigation. So, what's happening inside Israel's prisons? And has it worsened under the far-right government? We'll put that to our guests in a moment. First, this report from Kulthum Sharif.
29-year-old Palestinian Badr Dahlan says he was tortured by Israeli forces after he was arrested in Gaza and detained for a month without charge. His trauma and testimony give a vivid account of the treatment of Palestinians being held by Israel. There are numerous accusations of abuse, torture, with some even dying in prison. The director of Al-Shifa Hospital is among thousands of Palestinians held without charge. Mohammed Abu Salmiya was released on Monday after 8 months in an Israeli prison. He spoke of the horrors he witnessed.
Many of the Palestinian detainees were killed during interrogation. They were denied food, water and medicine. Israeli forces have no regard for any red line. They deal with detainees as if they were objects. Even the Israeli medical staff beat and torture them instead of treating them. Israeli forces torture prisoners day and night. Each Palestinian detainee has lost 25 to 30 kilos.
Israel has been jailing more Palestinians since it began its war on Gaza in October. More than 9,500 from Gaza and the occupied West Bank are being held in Israeli prisons. More than 600 of them are children. Israel's national security minister has previously called for Palestinian prisoners to be executed.
In recent days, I've dealt with questions. If the Palestinian prisoners have fruit baskets, or if they don't have it, and I say this, the Palestinian prisoners must be killed, shot in the head.
A UN report found Israeli authorities responsible for war crimes, starvation and sexual violence in the war on Gaza. The Commission said Israeli forces are carrying out what it called the extermination of Palestinians. In January, a UN human rights official accused Israel of mistreating Palestinian detainees in Gaza.
These are men who were detained by the Israeli security forces in unknown locations for between 30 to 55 days. They described being beaten, humiliated, subjected to ill treatment, and to what may amount to torture. They reported being blindfolded for long periods, some of them for several consecutive days.
Israeli forces tied a wounded Palestinian man to the hood of a military vehicle during a raid in the city of Jenin in the occupied West Bank. The military issued a statement that the soldiers violated protocol after the video was widely criticized. The use of civilians as human shields is banned under international law, but it appears in this war such practices have become common. Kulthum Sharif, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. In Deir Ghasana in the occupied West Bank, Fadia Barghouti, who was detained by the Israeli military for 90 days under its so-called administrative detention program. In occupied East Jerusalem, Basil Farraj, assistant professor at Birzeit University, specializing in the study of political prisoners and violence in prisons in Palestine and elsewhere. And in Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, Secretary General and founder of the Palestinian National Initiative. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Mustafa, let me start with you today. Palestinian detainees released from Israeli prisons. They have these very harrowing testimonies about what they've been through. They say abuse and torture are widespread and systematic. What is the overall picture like for Palestinians in Israeli jails? How dire is the situation for them?
The situation is absolutely dire, and it has gotten much, much, much worse since the 7th of October. But even before that, when Ben Gvir became in charge of internal security in Israel, and also in charge of all prisons in which Palestinians are kept. In reality, what you see here is systematic violation of human rights, systematic violation of norms, of how detainees should be dealt with, should be treated, and a constant and increasing amount of severe violations, including torture by beating people, torture in some cases in Gaza, even electrical shocks were used. In some cases, the interrogators tried to drown the people in water and used this technique. Additionally, they used, since the 7th of October in particular, starvation has become an instrument that the Israeli army is using against all detainees, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza. But above that, and in addition to it, the amount of torture that is practiced can be very dangerous, and that's why 56 Palestinian prisoners have already died in Israeli jails, mostly in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And this is not exceptional. It repeats, but it started to be the case much more after the 7th of October. In addition to that, I would like to say that the whole system of detaining Palestinians and arresting them is by itself illegal, because you cannot arrest children and put them in jail even without charges under the so-called administrative detention. You can't put 2,500 people, which is the number today, under the so-called administrative detention, which means they don't know why they are arrested. There are no charges. They have no clue. Their lawyers have no clue why they are in jail. And this kind of practice is not only continuing, but it is increasing. Since the 7th of October in the West Bank, Israel conducted no less than 9,600 new cases of imprisonment. In Gaza, more than 5,000. But in total, if we look at what happened since 1967, Israel conducted no less than 1 million arrests against Palestinian population under its occupation. So it's massive, it's horrible. Many people have been kept in jail, like Basil Barghouti, for instance, for more than 42 years. This is the longest ever for any prisoner, longest ever served service. I mean, 42 years. And it goes on. And now he is under administrative detention after spending 42 years in jail.
Mustafa, you're talking about administrative detention, and I want to go to Fadia now, because that's something she has a personal experience with, she and members of her family. Of course, when we're talking about administrative detention, this is a common Israeli practice where a person can be detained without charge or trial indefinitely. Fadia, as I understand it, that happened to you. I'm told that you were under administrative detention for 90 days. First, I want to ask you, when was that? Then I want to ask you what your experience was like.
Hi, everyone. I was under the administrative detention. I was arrested on the 22nd of February till the 21st of May for 3 months. I had no charge, no clear charge, and also the only thing that they told me that there is a secret file, as they always say about administrative detention, that there is a secret file and no one can see this file but the judge. And even my lawyer was unable to see this file. Also, my husband, my son are until now, they are under administrative detention. My husband is in Israeli jail for more than 22 months, and my son is in his 7th month, also under administrative detention.
Go ahead.
About my experience, I was taken in the middle of the night. I was, let's say, kidnapped from my house. The whole family, me, my husband, my son, were arrested in different stages, and we were put in different prisons, and we suffered from bad conditions. When you're talking about about testimonies from Palestinian prisoners, yes, I was beaten while arresting me in the military jeep. I was beaten in Hasharon prison. I faced strip search. I heard tens of bad insults. I was put for 4 days in very bad condition, in very, let's say, inhumane condition, in a very bad cell with a bathroom exposed to cameras. For 4 days, my bathroom was exposed to cameras, so I had to stay with no food and water so that I won't need to use the bathroom. So there is no humiliating more than this thing for a human. And also, as 72 other Palestinian female detainees, we were kept in a Damoun prison in a very, very bad isolation from the world, with no rights to know any news about the outer world, or to contact our families or contact our lawyers, in very bad conditions, yes.
And Fadia, just very quickly, were you told why you were detained?
No, as what Dr. Barghouti said, that this is administrative detention. Administrative detentions, you don't know why you are detained. But while I was being interrogated, they told me that you participated in demonstrations, and these demonstrations were family demonstrations for the families of Palestinian detainees. We were asking for the freedom of our family members. I was asking for the freedom of my husband, my son, asking for better conditions for Palestinian detainees. This is what I knew, or let's say understood from interrogation. So I was punished because I participated in activities asking for the freedom of my family members.
Basil, Amnesty International says that Israel's use of administrative detention was already at a 20-year high even before October 7th. How much has the use of administrative detention in Israel spiked in the months since October 7th?
Thanks, Mohammed. Well, this actually is very important. Since October 7th, over 7,000 renewals or new orders of administrative detention have been issued by the Israeli Zionist regime, which already by itself, I think, alludes to the way through which this carceral regime, this imprisonment, this prison logic has been used as a method of war, as a tool of war, not only to arrest Palestinians, as Fadia has described, in an attempt to kind of quell any form of political and social mobilization, but actually there's a broader logic behind this use of administrative detention, and you're rightly so to point out to this kind of rise in the use of this policy against Palestinians. This logic tells us that there's a broader function of imprisonment, which is not only to quell Palestinian resistance, but also to instill fear amongst the Palestinian population, and to tell Palestinians that they are not allowed, they are not supposed to even dare or to think about resisting the occupation. And I think the case of Mohammed Abu Salmi, the director of Al-Shifa Hospital today, is one example of this. I mean, he was detained, he was held without trial, and then he was released, and we have all heard about this kind of fuss and this insane discussion that the Israeli Zionist ministers are having now about his release. So again, the use of this policy tells us something about the nature of this regime, which is based upon imprisonment and upon prison as a logic to control the Palestinian population. And as Dr. Mustafa Barghouti correctly pointed out, I mean, we are talking about over 1 million Palestinians who have been arrested since the beginning of the occupation, and over 9,000 who have been arrested only over the past 9 months.
Mustafa, in January, I was reporting from the occupied West Bank. My team and I went to the Dheisheh refugee camp that's south of Bethlehem. I was struck by the fact that every alley that we walked down, every corner that we turned, we found one household or another full of families that were waiting on word about their loved ones who were being held under administrative detention. It was a real microcosm of the issue in general in this one concentrated place. And I wanted to ask you about that fact that in parts of the occupied West Bank, this has really become part of the fabric of daily life, right?
Absolutely. I don't think there is any family in Palestine who did not have a member or more of the family imprisoned by Israel at one point of time. I think 40 or 45% of all adult population, male adult population, have been to Israeli jails. So practically, this is a massive system of oppression, as was said, oppression and subjugation of people to a terrible system. And the goal is to try to break the will of the people and to try to make them accept the subjugation of being under occupation and a system of apartheid. But more than that, the situation now is even worse, because there are two things I would like to mention here, which is that, and they show how worse the situation has gotten. Certain behavior from Israeli ministers show that this system is moving very fast, if it hasn't reached actually a situation of fascism. Not just racism, not just oppression, not just apartheid, but actually fascism. When Ben Gvir, who is the minister in charge of prisons, a minister of internal security in Israel, and still in the Israeli cabinet, comes out and says that when they ask him why prisoners are not fed properly, he says they shouldn't be fed, they should be executed. And he says that he wants to pass a law of execution of all Palestinian prisoners. This is a minister, and nobody is saying anything about that. But the other, even more alarming thing is that when Mohammed Abu Salmiya, the director of Shifa Hospital, was released from jail after spending 8 months and after being tortured and starved, and when he was and without charges, no particular charges, he wasn't accused of anything. And when he was released, now the whole Israeli establishment, not only the ministers in the government, but also the leaders in the opposition, like Gantz and Lieberman, they are all protesting why the director of Shifa Hospital was released from jail, although there were no charges against him. This is the kind of fascism we are talking about, and it is very dangerous. Take another instance, which is how much Palestinians are used as human shields. It's not a new phenomenon. We used to see it in the Second Intifada, but it wasn't publicized as much as it is today, because now people see the photos, as Al Jazeera has shown in the last 24 hours. The photos of people who were stripped and used as a human shield to go into tunnels, to subjecting them to the risk of death, and some of them died actually. So the fact, the scene of that Palestinian who was injured and then arrested and then tied to a jeep and then walking with him in the streets and using him as a human shield, what do you need more than that? My worry is that the Western reaction to that, the reaction of so many governments in the world, is not only weak but almost absent. How could such a thing be allowed? And let me finish by saying that what we see here is a system of lawlessness. There is no legal due process when people are arrested. When you are arrested, you don't know whether you have rights, you don't have rights, you don't know whether you will survive, you don't know whether you will get your medications if you are sick. And if you get sick in jail, God forbid, that might be the end of your life, because they wouldn't provide you with medical care. And many, many people who were sick with different diseases did not get the medical care. And the most inhuman thing for me was the case of patients who had cancer and were in terminal stage. in the last days of their life, but they wouldn't release them to see their families. Not only that, Walid Doqa, who died with cancer in jail, even after finishing his term, he was not released, and his body is still not released. There are 385 Palestinian bodies that are still imprisoned by the Israeli army after they have died.
Basil, I saw you reacting to some of what Mustafa was saying there, so I want to let you jump in, but I also want to ask you about the fact that you do have the most far right-wing government in Israel's history currently in place, and there are many critics of that government who say that things have only gotten worse since this government basically took those seats. How concerned are you that things will continue to worsen?
Okay, so a couple of things. So first of all, it's very true that when we talk about Israel's carceral regime, so this broader prison logic, we have to take into account, and I think we have already highlighted this, that it's not new. The torture, the violence, the systematic abuse of Palestinian detainees, and the nature of this kind of this disregard of international law, of any form of law, in fact, is not new. It's not novel. It dates back to the beginning of this regime, of the violent existence of this entity upon our land. And this is important to note because there has been continuous complaints made by Palestinian detainees and former prisoners, actually specifically nearly 1,450 complaints that were submitted to the Israeli Ministry of Justice since from the period between 2001 and 2022, that have resulted in 0 indictments of any Israeli security officers or establishments. So this tells us something about the nature of impunity that the Israeli carceral regime, with its officers, guards, and soldiers, and of course the broader logic of the Israeli Ministry of Justice, that they actually have. So in fact, if you kill a prisoner, which we have been witnessing since the beginning of this war and even before, you know for certain that you would get away with it. And this is actually what has been unfolding since October 7th. We are talking about a situation where Palestinian prisoners have no access to adequate medical care, if anything at all. In some of the cases that I have spoken to, the Palestinian prisoners are rarely even given a painkiller in relief for their pain or suffering that they are feeling, which again tells us something about the nature of this regime. And this takes me to your second question. So it's important here to note that definitely since October 7th, the situation has deteriorated. We are talking about a reality where Palestinian prisoners are actually left to face their own fate. That's why we have this huge number of deaths. I don't recall having over 50 Palestinian detainees killed in the span of 9 months in Palestinian history. So the situation is unprecedented, actually. It's an alarm. And this takes me to your question about this Israeli far-right government. Definitely, it's alarming that we are witnessing this. Definitely, it's alarming that Ben Gvir and the like. And here, of course, we have to be careful not to distinguish between Ben Gvir and the far-right ministers, and of course, the other members of the coalition or the former members of the security cabinet, because again, they serve a function within this Zionist and Israeli settler colonial government. So it is alarming. The situation is unparalleled. And unfortunately, if we do not raise the alarm, if we do not ring the alarm, the situation will continue to deteriorate because, again, Israel has unleashed a war inside Israeli prisons. It does not actually care about any form of riots, any form of law. We have seen its disregard of any form of law as these 9 months have unfolded. As Dr. Mustafa has pointed out, what we have witnessed about the use of human, while it's not novel, it does tell us something about the use of Israeli violence and torture against Palestinians.
Fadia, when I was talking to people whose family members were held under administrative detention in the occupied West Bank, many of them were talking about how much that makes them suffer. There was one woman in particular, the wife of a man who was held under administrative detention, and she told me that things would be easier for her and her family if he had actually been charged, if he had actually been sentenced, that she would at least know how long the sentence is, when she could expect him home. With administrative detention, that it could just go on for months or years without having any kind of a definitive answer. Are these the kinds of feelings that you struggle with as well, considering the situation that you and your family are in?
Yes, absolutely. My husband is in his 10th year of being arrested. 8 years were under administrative detention. So we are talking about a very long duration. My husband was kept in Israeli jails with no charge. When you're under administrative detention or when you're under the threat of being detained under this type of detention, you feel that you might be arrested if the political situation needs this huge number of detainees, or if the government wants to show that they are arresting large numbers of Palestinians, so they can easily arrest hundreds, tens, thousands of people under this. We're talking about 2,400 or 500 Palestinians are under this type of detention. So let's say you are under the will, under the circumstances that their government wants. So you are not being held because you did something. You are under this type of detention because they want so. Because the Shin Bet decided that he wants you in, so you will be taken in the middle of the night and you will leave your family for months or years, like what happened with my husband. You feel that you have nothing to do. The lawyer can't help you. No one can help you. Saying that I did nothing can't help you. Families feel insecure because feeling that when political conditions change, your family member or you will be arrested. So this is a non-stopping threat and fear. My husband left us many times, so this isn't easy. I suffered from it. When you're taken and you don't know why you were taken, you will be kept for unknown duration. So when you finish
Fadia,
your first... Yeah.
Fadia, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We just don't have a whole lot of time left, just a couple of minutes. But I just want to ask you about the fact that there are so many human rights groups, investigative bodies who have said that, there need to be investigations into what's going on in Israel, that things need to change. Do you have any hope that anything will change, that there will be any accountability going forward?
Even if this hope is weak, we shouldn't stop speaking. We shouldn't stop exposing their crimes. We should keep on spotting the light on what's happening in with Palestinians, detainees, and in Israeli jails. I think more effort should be done. Israel doesn't care for any steps that are being taken worldwide, but I think this thing should change. We're talking about 10,000 Palestinian detainees who are suffering from torture all the time. We've lost tens of them, and I think more effort should be done, and everyone should participate in such a thing. Hope is still there, and I hope that the whole thing will change, and this thing will change with international effort, local effort, and with the legal organization effort. Everything can help.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Fadia Barghouti, Basil Farraj, and Mustafa Barghouti. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.